Here we go. There we go.
Cool. Good morning and welcome, everyone. We are, as Liesel was chatting about earlier, a year into these OD talks. We've started to notice how the light shifts from the seasons, and we've made it. We've come here. We were resilient enough to arrive at this point, and for the most part, I'm seeing smiles. So welcome and thank you for joining us. This morning, we're going to be chatting about looking at resilience through the lens of BANI. And it's a new concept that's come out recently. Liesel pointed it out to us. She heard on her favorite show, the Bruce Whitfield show, then talking about BANI as an alternative or a new acronym instead of VUCA. So what to expect from this morning is there are no answers. There are going to be lots of opportunities for us to engage with these new concepts and unpack it together. You know, if you look up BANI on the internet, you may find 2 or 3 articles. So it is brand spanking new. So I'm going to share my screen and throw some concepts out, and then we'll have an opportunity to go into breakout rooms and chat about it. So here we go. How do you fly this thing? Can everyone see my screen?
Just go in presentation, then it's a bit bigger, but I can see.
There we go. Okay. So we've come from a VUCA world, and honestly, I was only just getting the hang of that. And now they've thrown out a new acronym, BANI. So for those who aren't familiar with VUCA, I'm sure everyone is. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it's been a buzzword that everyone's been throwing around in business schools and in strategy generation to really help anchor the thinking in preparation for what may come. And now it was, well, VUCA was the term for 20 odd years. And now there's a new term that came out. Dion Chang from Flux Trends was put onto this acronym through the IT world, which often comes up with new acronyms. And he wrote an article around, does VUCA still serve us, or is this new acronym a better way to think about or anchor our thinking in this world of the pandemic? So when I say BANI, it stands for brittleness, anxiety, non-linearity, and incomprehensibility. And that's the general sentiment of where we found ourselves now with this global pandemic. And the reason it came out as an alternative to VUCA is that business would look to a linear model of how the world worked. And that's good up until a point, but it's no longer the case. So in his article, he spoke about strategy generation has, you have a 5-year strategy. It might now serve us to have a strategy that looks at a couple of months or 6 months at a time. So he wrote this and he used the acronym, not the acronym, the notion of tacking. It's a sailing term of swinging the nose of the boat into the wind so you can change the direction of the wind from one side to the other. So that's BANI, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. And if we think about resilience and our definitions of resilience, historically, it's been, you know, in our last newsletter, we quoted the Oxford Dictionary, to bounce back or to recover from. And the concept of elasticity was thrown out with regards to resilience, to return to a shape. And we've seen that that's no longer true. So if we think about resilience at its core, at the most simplest term, to be able to cope better, would BANI give us the ability to cope better from a perspective of thinking? In our newsletter, we spoke about, you know, will it give us new language and new perspective to think about things? And it brought me to a TED talk that I really, really enjoyed by Lera Boroditsky. And the argument around how language shapes the way we think and our reality. It's a wonderful 14 minutes TED talk. But she makes the point of, you know, recently science has started to get real data on how language does shape our reality. As an example, there's an Aboriginal tribe that their language always contains cardinal points. So she would say, the ant is to the south-southwest of your leg, or please move your cup north-northeast. Even when they greet, they say, I am headed in a northeast direction. So you can't even get past hello without telling people where you're going. And as a result, this tribe never gets lost. Their language orients them. With regards to language shaping events, if you think English, so in English, a man broke a vase, but in Spanish, the vase broke. This would significantly change the account of a crime or the way in which we assign blame. So just the way language works, that in English, you may punish someone for having an accidental, you know, breaking of the vase, but in Spanish, it may just be, the vase is broken, it was an accident. So the response to the event changes in accordance with how our language works. Even from the way our brains work. So in English, we say blue, and there's many shades of blue, but in Russian, there's light and dark blue. And when looking at these people's brains, when they're changing colors, the brains respond to the category change with surprise. So going from light blue to dark blue. So even the speed at which the brain processes a change in color is different based on language. So if we think about that, giving a new way to describe our current world, such as BANI as opposed to VUCA, how could that then shape the way in which we process, gain perspective, and therefore respond to this new world we find ourselves in? So why BANI? With Brittle, we've currently realized that, you know, things that are too big to fail have been failing, or with, as an example, farming, betting all of their sort of revenue on a particular crop, and something goes wrong, that entire thing is a failure. So we're starting to understand that things may seem strong or too big to fail, or even resilient, And we found out that recently that's not the case. And when we say anxious, there's a notion, there's a feeling of anxiety, or that gut feel of dread or impending doom, waiting for the next crisis to arrive. Mental health issues have increased. Suicide rates have increased. Alcoholism has increased. It's the state of the world currently is anxious. And then when we speak about non-linearity, we're talking about non-linear logical systems where cause and effect doesn't fit together perfectly. And incomprehensibility, not being able to predict or fully understand what the consequence of these events are now. So that's BANI. I'm going to break you out, or Liesel is going to break you out into some breakout rooms where I want you to chat about this new acronym. How does it make you feel? Why does it make you feel that way? Is it a positive feeling? Is it a negative feeling? We experimented with this a couple of weeks back in one of our OD check-ins. And there was a surprising response. So I'd love to put it forward to you. With this new term, BANI, this new acronym, what is your immediate response? How do you think about that? Okay, I'm going to stop my share and we can break out into rooms. There's 16 of us. Can we do...
You'll get the invitation on your screen, and the people who just joined, I'll send you to a room soon. 2 people have left, Roy, and 2 people have come on. So my rooms are a bit dear McCord, but I'll figure it out in the next 3 seconds. You should have an invitation on your screen.
Are you Guido?
There was a minute of Guido on screen. There we go.
Hi, Liesel and Christo.
Hi, Marie.
And Roy.
Marie.
Okay, everybody's back.
Awesome. Welcome back. I hope you had an interesting and good conversation. We're going to take some feedback from each of the rooms to see how we've all responded to this new and personally I find quite scary acronym. So maybe we could start with Dave, Kathy, Marie, and Michael. What was the conversation in your spot?
Well, there was a coup d'etat, firstly. It turns out I'm the spokesperson. Well, and you guys jump in if I if I don't get it right. Initially, the reaction is perhaps, as you said, Roy, a bit negative and a bit scary. But the conversation moved towards the kind of acknowledgement that perhaps it's more realistic, and perhaps that sort of VUCA perspective was, trying to smooth over something which kind of might be a bit more far-reaching and serious than we think, and that BANI more aptly describes that. And we dug into some of those concepts like incomprehensibility and the definition of what it actually means to comprehend something. And therefore our situation, we agreed, at least at that level, is incomprehensible. And we felt that from a resilience perspective, in the long term, given that most of and capitalism came up, is most of our activities tend to be geared to short-term gains. But from a long-term perspective, we think it's a good thing in that it will better prepare us for that which is coming, and that is change. To the point where this might be the first major pandemic for 100 years, but it's not the last one for the next 20 years. And there'll be other changes. So change being the norm, volatility being the norm, being agile now becoming the norm. The notion of BANI, whilst it appears negative, from a longer term perspective, better prepares people for the inevitable. That's so, Marie, Dave, Kathy, jump in if I've misinterpreted, mispronounced, or left out something entirely.
No, you were spot on. Thank you, Michael. Just
go on, Marie.
Just to add that, yeah, I think the conundrum initially was that when you read BANI, there can be a sense of hopelessness just in that statement. But like Michael said, that it actually transcends to a point where it's actually a little bit more realistic in terms of the current reality. And it actually prepares people to be a little bit more agile and acknowledge that change is going to be constant. We actually just also played with the idea that anxiety is actually not always a negative thing. And Kathy brought some great insight around, maybe anxiety is a state of being, and people will find opportunity in anxiety. So, yeah. Sorry, I broke off there. But the idea that it's a state of being, and people will learn coping mechanisms with anxiety.
Thank you, Marie. So BANI gives us a more realistic perspective so that we can respond better, if I had to summarize that. Who was the next room? Christu, who was in the room with you? Do you guys want to jump in and share what your conversation was?
It's a pity Deborah left, because I would say the general feeling in our room, and Bernard and Myra jump in, was a little bit of skepticism about the need for a new term. I must say that's certainly something that I feel. For instance, I can't see that non-linear is a better word than complex for me, but there was something around bringing a little bit more of the inner dimension, the experiential dimension in terms of anxiety that's absent in VUCA. But what Deborah and Myra as well said was, in the organization you can work with VUCA, with leaders as well known, etc. BANI feels a bit hopeless. Now, personally, I don't have much of a problem with hopelessness. There's that Kafka quote he says from the trial where he says, "There's hope, but not for us." So there is something around but there is something around hopefulness and hopelessness in the term. I like what came up around anxiety, because I do think it's something that we need to confront and ask ourselves, are things really brittle? Does it provide a better description of the world? Brittleness, incomprehensibility, does it provide a better description than both ambiguous and uncertain? Does it confront us with our actual inability to understand things, or are we still going to live in this, these are my words, not the group's, but live in this sort of tail end of the Enlightenment where we believe that we can understand everything. Bernard, Myra? Bernard, you're on mute. I can see you talking, but you're on mute.
Sorry for that. Yeah, no, these big words makes it already more complex, if I can put it that way. So we have to think inside the BANI, so to get a bigger perspective of all these things. Yeah, it's you have to really think about this, where this all fit in, and how does the world approach things, and how do you approach people and things like that. So yeah, the organizations will find some of these things in their organizations, but yeah, it's yeah, it's I tend to agree with Christo, and my contribution is just, yeah, it stays complex, but I think we all have to adapt to change and start thinking differently about things, and don't just take everything for granted, and don't lose hope. So we must find where people and organizations are, so we can move them on. Never mind the acronym, to my understanding.
Thanks, Bernard.
Thanks.
Who was in the next room?
Rita, Richard, Dave, and Edward.
I can chirp a bit here. General indifference. None of us felt that we had been living a VUCA life and have switched now to a BANI life. Another suggestion was, can we change it from BANI to BANI? Because the minute you get BANI, the dinosaur in your head, you struggle to think clearly beyond that. Yeah, useful as a broader, within a business, as a broader context for thinking. I wouldn't go and implement BANI in a business because I don't think it would be useful, but as a broader thinking, maybe Dave, Edward, Guido can chip.
No, I don't have much more to say, Richard. I think you've captured it. A fair level of indifference. Anxiety did come out as something that resonated more with us. And yeah, I guess if we had to unpack it a little bit more, we could probably see the benefit of the thinking and the shift of thinking in terms of how we deal with people in our businesses and how we deal with our own lives, but not really going to take it on and have massive awareness personally for BANI.
Thanks, Dave. Anyone else from the group want to throw in the 2 cents pennies worth? No, real good. That leaves
Gail and Sandra.
Yeah. Gail and Sandra, we'd love to hear from you. How was that chat?
Hi guys, I don't have a camera, it's Gail here. So it was a fantastic group of 2 because we just got to completely dominate the conversation. And Sandra had some awesome insight. I'm going to leave her to share that. From my side, when we language things, our attempt as human beings is to anchor. And sometimes in the anchoring, we can be restrictive. And so the world around VUCA, the conversation was quite frightening and negative and vulnerable and volatile. And the word's been around for a long time. It's not a new word. It's long before COVID. And so businesses were all either wanting to stop the VUCA or prevent the VUCA or expand the VUCA. And I think the language became a little bit restrictive. And then I did some research around it, and I discovered that there had been iterations around the word. And in fact, I presented a speech in 2020 where I created my own iteration of VUCA, looking at, well, what if volatile was vulnerable? And what if we spoke about authentic instead of, I can't remember what the A stood for. I've just lost the A right now.
Ambiguous.
Yes, what if it was authentic rather than ambiguous? What if our leadership in COVID needed to become more caring? You know, leadership 3.1. We've been hearing from Harvard University for years how leadership is dead, and yet everything we talk about is leadership. And what if the VUCA of the 2021 year could just become more compassionate? And so when the BANI purple dinosaur image came through, for me it opens another language debate, and it can be powerful, and stuff that's come up from the presenters today shows some of where that power can be heading, and not to get restricted in the stuckness or the anchoring. I think really what we are looking at is evolutions and iterations of evolutions around the revolution of the workplace. What if it was never stable? What if the very fact that keeps us in the place of debate, and the research that Dion Chang and Bruce Whitfield are presenting to us, is exactly the energy that we need to hold a more positive and hardworking, mind-thinking space for us as we move forward? I think it was Christo who said really powerfully about the living in enlightenment, where we believe we can understand everything. What if this is a fantastic anchor and lighthouse that says, actually, maybe you don't? And maybe that's how we get these kind of conversations going as to where business is heading. And before I hand over to Sandra, there was just a note that I made here, I'm just looking in my notes, is around the fact that how long, Roy and crew, have we been saying everything is about change. Change is the only certainty. We come to work every day to work in the space of change. That's where I'm kind of finding comfort in this next evolution and revolution, because it is generating amazing thinking and amazing revolution in business. Sandra, over to you.
Thanks, Gail. I think you've summarized it well. And yeah, I think for me, the word that really comes to mind is how resilient we really are as a human race. If you go back to prehistory, there's always been chaos and war and disasters and diseases and so on. And so if we think about all of us being heroes, we are all come from long lines of survivors. And so for me, this word around BANI is just kind of more of the same. The world has always been this way, and we are just in the middle of it, trying to make sense of it all, as previous generations were facing the challenges that they faced with the technology that they had available to us. So yeah, I think it's just about acknowledging that. And so for me, it's just a reminder of the incredible resilience of the human race, although it has had huge detrimental effects on the planet. So yeah, that would be my contribution.
Thank you, Sandra and Gail. That's all the groups, hey, Liesl?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to share my screen again. Please hold while we process your request. Everyone got my screen? Okay, so we've come out of there we go. We've come out of the conversation in the breakout rooms with, I get a sense of a more stark view or language to describe reality. And in some of the comments where anxiety has, as a new addition to the level of thinking, where VUCA looked at systems, BANI looked at, you know, the experience or people in this in this new world. So thinking about if this gives us a more stark or real view of the world, does it not position us better to make sense of and respond to? So in the article by Stefan Grabmeier, where they talk about VUCA versus BANI, they put forward a framework or a way in which to think about, okay, so if something is brittle, what does it require? Does it require capacity or resilience? How would you respond differently knowing that things are brittle? And if we're feeling anxious, we need empathy or mindfulness. If we are aware or cognizant of the fact of this constant anxiety, how would we navigate our days differently? Would a mindfulness session of 10 minutes with yourself before a board meeting be on your to-do list? Just descend to yourself and settle yourself, or to feel or engage more with empathetic conversation and behavior with yourself and with your colleagues. If something is non-linear and you don't understand or can't quite easily make the connection between cause and effect, do you spend more time around the context? Or do you spend more time having conversations around how do we adapt to with this context in mind? Or if something is incomprehensible, do you demand transparency and rely more on intuition or gut feel? So if this, as Gail was saying, is a more real anchor, because the response this time, and when we chatted about it a couple of weeks ago in our OD check-in, is the initial response was negative. It was a response of hopelessness. And when the conversation emerged, it was an acceptance, maybe we are really here. So what do we do about it? And I think that's the intention of this particular acronym or framework. So to give us a better perspective on where we are, a lot of the previous terms, like VUCA, come out of business schools, where it's a complicated or a complicated word or jargon that sort of separates who understands or engages with it. Whereas, BANI is more inclusive in terms of who is the average Joe on the street and how would they approach the world with this real view. So it's not butted up. It's not spun around consulting jargon. It's more of a stark view. So we've got another breakout room coming. With this new language, creating new perspective, how would this different perspective allow you to think about resilience in a new way? How would you personally navigate through this world? Or in the context of your team, what would you do differently? Or looking at your organizational department, how would you respond in a different way, thinking about BANI as a way to shift your perspective? So Liesel, if we could break everyone up into their rooms to have a chat about, so with this new perspective, how would you think about resilience at either the personal level, the team level, or organizational level? And then we'll feed back to the rooms to find out if it's even useful, and what surprising things came out of the conversation that you could take into the world today to do differently that may support better resilience at those levels of system. And we'll chat for about 15 minutes.
You should be getting your invitation on the screen.
Roy, I just have a question. Why do you say that BANI, and I'm paraphrasing, is more accessible to people, and VUCA is more, business school talk? What about BANI is more accessible to people?
So with VUCA, complex refers to complexity theory. The average person on the road has no idea what the Canavan framework is. But as an individual looking at those words, we understand brittle, we understand anxious, we are living through those things. Non-linear, it's not a consulting term anchored on a framework behind a framework.
Okay. Okay, so that's maybe less academic. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Just going to run to the gents quick.
The biggest system that we're all part of, it's not going to change overnight, and to some extent it's very difficult for us to influence it. And so there is a sense of, and certainly Richard and I think share that, a sense of rage about that, and the risk of falling into hopelessness. But on the other hand, a refusal to give up. So we were talking about the fact that it's the education where we construct resilience is in how we educate our children, and the education system that we have, the institutions that we have, are not designed or orientated to build resilience for the future that is upon us. And that is really the site where that's the real change that we need. But in the short term, that's not going to happen. So we started talking about how do we start working, or how do we continue working day to day right now? And Bernard was talking about accepting the things that we can't change, and continuing what we can change. I was also thinking, I didn't have time to say that, it's also how do we show up in the world? And as we work with leaders, how do we invite, entice, maybe nudge them to start to understand and to be different themselves, and to feel comfortable about that? And we were talking about how really the essence of it is about having lost our humanity, and how do we bring back more humanity. And I was thinking, one thing I might do is ask a leader, have you phoned your own call center? Have you been through the till in your own shop? How was it for you? What you got is what you give. And see how it is. But I don't know, I haven't done it yet.
I'd love to hear how that goes. Anything from Richard or Bernard to add? Got a shaking head from Bernard.
I had a thought as we were pulled back into the main group, and which is if you're being resilient, resilience comes after things that you need to be resilient to, And I would love to live in a world where we don't need that much resilience because we're not trying to move beyond things that are challenging, if that makes sense. I don't know how it fits into the context of this, but it was an interesting thought for me as we pulled back, is resilience. You're resilient against something. If we can reduce those somethings, then we might not need resilience as much. Then we would be living in a better world.
The utopian world run by AI, when we can just be on holiday and drink mojitos all day. Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Guido, your group with Dave, Edward, and Sandra. I'd love to hear from you. What were the ahas or thoughts or rage against this whole thing anyways?
So I had to step out of it, so I'm maybe not the best to summarize the conversation. Dave, maybe?
If I can react to Richard's comment, one of the things we mentioned was that the universe has been changing constantly for 13.7 billion years. Richard, it's not going to stop. We talked about language at the start and whether these four-letter acronyms that somebody suddenly invented and become famous for actually mean as much as they would like to claim, and particularly the fact that, as several people have already said, the BANI one is full of fairly negative words. And we discussed the idea that a lot of resilience, if you're looking at team and organizations, is about what language you use and how you use it, and try and keep away from words like incomprehensible and brittle. At a personal level, a point came up that quite often it isn't language and things like that that affect the resilience. It's the support you get in difficult situations from people. And perhaps in a sense that comes through language, but a lot of it comes through what they do to help you, not just what they say to help you. So I'll get, and the organizational aspect, again, there was a lot of comment about projecting the right kind of messages through the way that you use language. An interesting example came up of a course.
Dave, you're very soft. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I wonder why. Is that better?
No.
What's going on here?
You were fine, and then after your phone rang, your voice kind of went soft.
I just put it down. Input level, microphone. Let's bring that.
Maybe try mute and unmute.
No, now you're gone.
What?
Well, I've taken the mute off. Can you not hear me at all now?
We can. Very soft.
Very softly.
How strange. Is this helping at all?
No.
Are you using the microphones on your headphones?
It's going up quite steadily at the moment. Okay. Are you,
Oh, there you go.
touching?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wonder what it did there. Okay. I think I was getting on for being finished. Although the others in the group will probably have something that I've missed.
Okay. Love to hear from them.
Nothing from my side, Dave. Thank you for summarizing.
Yeah, and I think, was it Sandra? She dropped off. So,
We seem to have lost Sandra.
Yeah, you have well summarized.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Michael, Marie, Gail, how was your chat?
Invigorating. We spoke across personal, team, organization. You didn't focus on any specific one, but so is BANI useful? The response was, and I quote, hell yeah. There's some discussion around the fact that we thought perhaps it's a euphemism for necessity is the mother of invention, and that it assists in helping us to make sense of the world, and supports a notion that we sort of spoke around, and that's okay not to know. We're hell-bent on knowing and measuring, and the thought of not knowing is quite scary to society, we think, but this is perhaps saying to us that it's okay not to know. And we also felt that in a more organization sort of team context, that it does lead to more inclusion and more collaboration. That was the intro for Gail, so I present Gail Lewis.
Thank you so much, Michael. We had an amazing group. The insight was fantastic. It was indeed an invigorating conversation. I definitely pin a lot of this around the shifting towards collaboration and inclusion, and the language we use around that has to create a kind of framework of inventiveness and progression. Two things that came out from the other group that were just poignant. The one is reminding us about how the universe has constantly been in change for just a couple of billions of years. And when we try and textbook and spreadsheet answers to everything, it's very restrictive. And the other one is the fact that the whole thing of resilience, why we need it. Calling it whatever we will, adaptability and progression is where we're going here. One of the things that came up is we spoke about kind of like the fringe society. You've got your leftists, you've got your rightists, you've got your extremists. Even in the nonsense, there's value. Because if we look at where we sit right now in this pandemic, we have so much that we're told is the absolute truth. We have so much dictatorial stuff to sit and to follow because that's what it is. And 26 million spreadsheets and statistics will prove it. And on the far right-hand side, we have the fake news, and on the further right-hand side, we have the conspiracy theorists that are often kind of rejected as the fringe brigade, the loon brigade. But actually in the center is so much value. And when we have the debate around looking at the extremist stuff on the continuum, and being able to see and work from the center, we have so much more richness. Whether you want to call it resilience or whatever you want to call it, it's the richness that comes from being open to the full debate and not cutting off the edges as lunacy. And what that comes to is where Michael started around the collaboration and the inclusion. And in business for so long, the C-suite has been the holder of decisions. And yet the brains and the power at the bottom has got so much value to add. It's pie in the sky, guys. It feels almost like, episode 2, tune into Netflix next week. We'll show you the answers. We don't have the answers. We don't know how to be completely inclusive of these amazing minds that we are calling millennials, Generation X, people that don't want to work. They just want to sit at home, drive fast cars and watch Netflix. But there's power in having acronyms and languaging stuff like this that forces us to look beyond the spreadsheet and the textbook. And I really believe the answer in business, in teams and the business as a whole, is in tapping into the untapped value that we have in our companies. How, ladies and gentlemen, I leave to you, because as a consultant, that sure ain't my problem.
Thank you, Gail. Do we still have Marie on the line? No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, cool. Christu, Dave, Mira, how was your chat?
Okay, I'll go. Great chat. First of all, nice to get to hear other people's perspectives. I don't come from a big corporate, but it's the chat was around the sort of culture in big corporates and how this an acronym won't really necessarily change the leadership of a big corporate. Big corporates are are run in a certain way, almost to create anxiety. Corporates create anxiety so that it's almost a way of keeping employees on their toes and fearful, and that's maybe a culture. So what we did say is that maybe changing an acronym from VUCA to BANI does allow us, to maybe create space and make space for new focus. It'll allow us to maybe plant seeds and create sparks and start new conversations, maybe in the corridors and around water coolers, etc., which kind of goes back to what Gail was saying, where the C-suite kind of run the show, but do they run the show really well? And maybe having new conversations allows the talent that sits below the C-suite to be unearthed and start, shifting mindsets. I don't know if that's captured well. Krista, Myra, please chip in.
No, I think you have summarized it very well, Dave.
I love that you call it an acronym, Dave. It sounds like an anachronism.
Consultant speak, Krista.
There's something in that. Yeah, I think it's especially from what you said in a big corporate, that there's no space for this, and maybe that's the value of this little term, is that it just creates a little bit of space for us to actually start to engage with, what is brittle, what causes anxiety, how does it? This is a little bit of a shift towards the actual experience of people, and away from this this hard context with which you always just have to sort of deal.
So all in all, do we think that BANI is useful? In closing, I see heads nodding here.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's an Einstein quote. The thinking that got us into the problem is not going to get us out of the problem. We require new thinking. And perhaps that's what this acronym may open up, just to shift perspective and give a different language to how we respond to and approach different contexts. I think it's quite early in the day for BANI to replace VUCA. Only the guys at the bleeding edge of trends are starting to pick up this language. But I think I'd like to see how organizations, teams, and individuals start thinking about, or even if they decide, no, BANI's not for me, I'm going to reject that. I'm excited to see how things unfold. And thank you very much for being a part of this exploratory conversation with us. Thank you for joining and giving so valuably your time, your perspectives, your opinions, and engaging with an open mind in this new concept. So we're up. Time is up, and I hope to see you all at the next OD Talk, which happens every second week. We haven't quite picked the topic yet, but if you keep an eye out on our newsletter, we'll be flying out some information there. So those who want to stay on and continue to chat, you're welcome to. We'll hang around. But otherwise, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to hold this space with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Yeah.